كما أنه ليس له شريك في ملك. وتفسيرها الذي يوضحها قوله تعالى: وإذ قال إبراهيم لأبيه وقومه إنني براء مما تعبدون إلا الذي فطرني فإنه سيهدين وجعلها كلمة باقية في عقبه لعلهم يرجعون.
استمر.
وقوله تعالى: قل يا أهل الكتاب تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم ألا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيئا ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله فإن تولوا فقولوا اشهدوا بأننا مسلمون.
أيوة فإن تولوا. نعم جميل. أيوة جيد. أنت بدأت بدليل الشهادة. دليل الشهادة
تبدأ من أي شيء؟
لا ما في مشكلة، أنا أبدأ من دليل. بسم الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله تعالى من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأزواجه الطيبين الطاهرين أمهات المؤمنين وعلى صحابته الغر الميامين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. ثم أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أجارنا الله وإياكم من سامع من نار. أيها المباركون السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ما زال حديثنا موصولا معكم مع هذا الكتاب المبارك هو كتاب الأصول الثلاثة أو ثلاثة أصول أدلتها لشيخ الإسلام محمد بن عبد الوهاب بن سليمان التميمي رحمه الله رحمة واسعة. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا ما علمتنا وزدنا علما ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين واجعل ما علمتنا إياه حجة لنا لا علينا. قال رحمه الله تعالى: فدليل الشهادة قوله تعالى: شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. قال: ومعناها لا معبود بحق إلا الله. قال تندو كسلك إلى إمام صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. من فنيا كنيم حكيلو بلندي كتاب ولا من كتاب شيخ الإسلام محمد بن عبد الوهاب على كتابه من ملاسل سبوتي أي دليل من تناس من كذا سيدي على كروت. قال سبحانه وتعالى سيدي على كانت علي مران ياما شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو. على سيدي على ينكم بدو منزلك من بيتونيارين فاتح على دماء سبحانه وتعالى. والملائكة ملائكة فنال سيديات ولا كوبات منزلك من بتونيار فعلى دماء ولكن لا يعصون الله ما أمره ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. وأولو العلم أيضا قائما بالقسط لنا المليالم كل لنا كجام ليكو لندو داودا نانا كتاب القرآن ولا سنة نب أي علم فك علم شرعي ولا على لون لندو ولا ملندو ين دنيا لندو والمو كوفلان جملة ولا تنيل لندو دورنو نمو دنيا لندو لصدو دنيا لندو دمارن أمان على لون يبقى كوندي لندو ولا مو لمبارو لبيل لمبارو yo sita data min kame malo ate mu londi fulan jane pour ñin kama ko kela londi folo kilimandi ibe alabatano la ñame ñin duniya ko mumbe be na tan won wodo lonnal miliyalon ko be lore nden tilon kam tilon façon mumbe be qa'iman bil qist yana halolum jan hala kawnihim qa'imin bil qist ibe lore nden tilon la fi jami' ahwalihim ini ala tem ini ala la jonglo tem ibel lorin je telemo wal fana sedi ata nako la ilaha illa huwa al aziz al hakim ifana sedi ala nako badu man sa kere min beto yan fa ala damma ayni we sen kan la ilaha illallah kuma kan furko folo nyim bambandi kada ndar lemu korbal kula manso al aziz manso mi yaron ko bembukano al hakim atlem mansoti femo fen aka landa la dillat wala ñinde fo mosi song ala la kiti wala yakko ko jodra lon ko ala ya lande wala nya muda be de ka wala ataslim ya songa imanyanna afara ko muda na nyin keta muda na nyin keta muda na ala kare keta muda na ala kare keta o mu ala la kiti woldi anda arabu kanyina wala na mosi hakilo de ñondo baak to mandiro bo ala bala ya subhanahu wa ta'ala wa rabbuka yakhluqu ma yasha'u wa yakhtaru ma kana lahum al-khiyar ala la ka fen da min diata mo buka discourse anda ala ka fen tom bon fana min diata wala na ka dinkiral buñandi ala la ka dinkiral buñandi ay wato buñandi ay jonglu ay tom mandiro ke malaikol kono kilariya mol ko ay suwandiro ke nyam adama de fana kono kilariya mol e ma ja ma fa jino kono kilariya mol be ko la wa kala kilariya mol man tare ko e ka bula adama de la kilariya mol le non ñina mo ayatu dalilo min koyda qur'ano kon ali atanda ka tom mon kilariya mol hatta malaikol wala rasul ka min ki kilariya mol ka aman ke ki malaikol le kam buri da'wa de ake ki ala kilariya mol ka rusul e se wol mum be sen jalle ko jibril be jama alayhi salam ana ata hada madun fanal kuna e mol suwandi je beli alon ko ikada ko mandir la wala kilariya mol te ata ala le wol suwandi subhanahu wa ta'ala وتاتا نياكو حكيم يلبمو إكافو من صيغة المبالغة أكنانين كينيا لمي علم كو دان نسير ملا مانكرو لمي علم كو فنتا يكو ملا كوتك نيكو حكيم دو من ترى أي نياتو لكوتك أفتتا دان دولان عليمو فنان بولا نيام على دا مانكرو لمي بيكناتن العزيز العليم الخبير يلبيكناتن سبحانه وتعالى ودن يلمو مي بي سيرياتا ala la kilim baya ala fon sediyata ala ay malaikul fana sediyata ala ka adam malle batu man sa to nyamati don na tili de fana lu fana sediyata woto meli alon ko ke mol ko mandi isti batolu kan kaburu batolu ke fonkul wal man tare bu ko kon don na ko meli alon ko tili ala ko wa ulul ilmi qa'iman bil qisd dol bi ala si so lon do qur'an ya tanga ni ko bu be tanga bari e ka mol ko mandi fa on lel kan nasallallahu salamata wal afiyah.
Sheikh, he thanks Allah. He says, the great scholar, Sheikh al-Islam, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he says, he brings proof here in the book. He says, فَدَلِيلُ شَهَادَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى. He says the proof of this shahada that he mentioned prior. He says, Allah says in the ayah, شَهِدَ اللَّهُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُ. He says, Allah himself, he says that he bears witness that there is no deity, no God that deserves to be worshipped other than him, Allah himself. He says, Allah himself bears witness. He says, Allah himself and then the angels. He says, wal malaika. He says, and the angels here. He says, these are the angels that they are just. These are the angels that they do not disobey Allah. لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. He says, they are the ones whom They do as Allah commands them. They do not transgress, nor do they deny or disobey Allah's commands. He says also the scholars, he says, as it says in the ayah, Ulul ilm qa'iman bil qist, and those scholars who are just and righteous, Allah has given them knowledge. He says the scholars, they explain that this knowledge that is referred to in this ayah is the Sharia knowledge, the knowledge of the deen, not the knowledge of the dunya. He says the scholars, they say all the other knowledge that are available, that are not of the Sharia knowledge, are also knowledge, but they do not benefit someone who does not have knowledge of the akhirah, and it does not benefit him except it makes him the biggest loser. He says if one has all the knowledge of the dunya and has nothing of the akhirah, then he is the biggest loser. He says because all the knowledge of the dunya, it is available and established only to help you to attain that which is for you in the akhirah. He says, so Allah, he says, these scholars, they are just because they do not call people to themselves, but rather they call people to Allah. He says, Allah also says, He Himself, He repeats back the ayah, Allah says, He Himself, He bears witness that He is the only one who deserves to be worshipped. Then He says, the angels as well, they also bear witness and they testify that Allah is the only one who deserves to be worshipped. He says, these angels as well, they also do not disobey Allah. They are just between them and the relationship they have between them and Allah. They do it correctly. They do not wrong themselves. And the relationship they have with the creation of Allah as well, they do it correctly. They do not wrong themselves or the creation of Allah like the human beings. He says, La ilaha illahu. Allah says that there is no deity worthy of worship except Him. He says, Al-Alim, La ilaha illahu al-Aziz al-Hakim. He says, Allah, He says here, He is the mighty, the one who possesses all wisdom. He says, this is why we should not question Allah's wisdom. Allah mentions here, He is Al-Hakim. He puts things in their right order. We should not question Allah, why does Allah do this for me? Why does Allah do that for that person and not do it for me? He says, because Allah is the one, He mentioned that, He says, وَرَبُّكَ يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Your Lord is the one who creates whatever He likes. وَيَخْتَارُ. And He chooses. He says, Allah, He chooses different days and different times. Allah will choose a place and honor it and make it something great. Allah will choose a time and honor it and make it something great. He said the same way Allah will choose among the angels and give them a higher position than other angels. He says the same thing. Allah will choose among the human beings and give them something greater than the rest of the other human beings. He says, even among the jinns, you will find that Allah did not give them what He gave us, the human beings. Allah did not pick a messenger among the jinns. Rather, the jinns, they have to follow the prophets and the messengers among the human beings. He says, so Allah chooses and He gives someone a greater position than another person, so no one should question Allah. He says, this is why you will find it even among us human beings. Allah chooses some and make them greater and higher in position than others. And the same thing even among the angels. Allah chose some angels and gave them a greater position than the others. He says this is why you find even among the angels themselves, Allah chose messengers like Jibreel. He says Allah did not choose these messengers to go and relay the message to the angels, but rather Allah chose them so that they can relay the message to the messengers. But Allah chose them and gave them a higher position than the other angels. He says the same thing as the human beings, the messengers among the human beings. Allah chose them and gave them a higher position above all the other people. He says, so this shows us that Allah is truly Al-Hakim. He has wisdom and justice in the things that He does, and none of us should question Allah's justice in His wisdom and His decisions. He says, and this also reminds us of the fact that Allah is the one at the highest position with these characteristics, because He says Al-Hakim. He says there is no one above Him in that character. There is no one that has a higher amount of that character than Allah. He says, and that goes for all the names of Allah. Al-Hakim, Al-Alim, Al-Khabir. He is the one with the highest of those qualities, and no one surpasses Him in those qualities. He goes back to the ayah. He says, Allah says in the ayah that He reminds us that He Himself, He bears witness, and the angels and the scholars who are just, that He is the only one who deserves to be worshipped.
قال شيخ الإسلام ومعناها لا معبود بحق إلا الله. أكو تو مومنتي ودم باتو فندي كريمين بتو نيار باتو تو نياتا نيجي نامن كارت بحق إلا الله ينم لا إله إلا الله على تعريف من صحته نيبا فلان كافو بدو ما تذكر فيا لا جمين بتونيا دو بدو ما سفهم سياسة بل من تا تونيا دو على دم إلا الله فيو استثناء سبنا أدم ما درون عندهم عليهم سبحانه وتعالى قرآن وكن أكثر من مرة نيتانا سورة الحج على آية وروكنا آية فجي على سبحانه وتعالى أقول ذلك بأن الله هو الحق وأنه يحيي الموتى وأنه على كل شيء قدير أقول من جد أقول على أتلم تونيات قد منصوت عند لك فرعون بالون عند على لي يقول مبين أكونتينيتا وصورة كيلو نينكون أقول ذلك بأن الله هو الحق أقول على أتلم تونيات قد منصوت وأن ما يدعون من دونه أقول كملكم من دا تنولتو هو الباطل ولا مفنيات با تونيالا أوبوسيتو منتي ولا مفنيات وتولى على يا من تونيا فلا أحد منه يستحق العبادة بل عبادة باطلة فين كلين دول كل ميالن كالا باتو جارات فين كلين دول كل ميالن كانيان دكباتو على دمارا يند باتلو سبحانه وتعالى أقول لي أن آية كلام من نفس الآية أدارا في سورة اللقمان آية 30 نفس اللقمان هذا سيغا ناتنيام سورة الحج كنا آية سيغا ولنيام وذلك بأن الله هو الحق وأن ما يدعون من دونه هو الباطل على أتلم تونيات باتمان سو تونياماتي إذا فهم فهم كمان من على من كده ومفنيات أمانك ألت أني على يا كمان دام أمانك تونيات ولكن إمامه يا جزاه الله خيرا أي خطبة كجميعا great خطبة لموت ميالهم كو بلما ما بيد مولين يستفيدون من هذا والله يعلم الكتاب والسنة مؤمن كي ستين دي ولا ودرن كي دهن أي ديابدا من بدن المحرم is very important thing مول كافر دو مول يعمل دو فويسي that كم سا مناسبات ولا الحدث ميرم كلين أنا هدرون من يوم كتندالا درابان برمنكم ما تجد ولا الاقتداء أي من فجنا أفضل مثل ما جماعة بيجي فنجي واي سويدن يقرأ وفنجي يمود كم فعلك demonstration أمانك مسلمي على يامر مسلمي كلمة يامر عندو مسلمي أبوك فاسان ولا مون ينتهي يولو هذا مو مليون للكاكي وما تناك دينتي dino la kiriya mo mindi kila ay minta de kila ne mar riven ka la juroja dana ma ke neva mili ya fengende hada mo le ko ma ma makan ko fulan ka fo moli ya deten ni fala moli hijra ke comme bindo la mol mi ango magral bisle mol ka magral ka dani ba ko ya nyen dolu taake da ni borsela dino ha kila sallallahu alaihi wasallam it's very important pour que mol hakilo fulanda ba man ke kila le ye hijra to la ka ko bisle mol la sam do ka kumasi yene ay fam ko je ne mol ye khutba nyin la is very important memo dino ti kila sallallahu alaihi wasallam kabira na da atar yahudul kaki akoy an kanyen so alga munad na alga so e ka wolun ne ale musa kanande temmo mina musa na la modda e ba fes ko ka ko inna la mudrakun ya kuma kama bamban wallahi kamna ni e kalli da ka ko indol yanda sodon already musa ko no adina ko kalla inna ma ya rabbi sayahdi akoy no ndara mare ben fejan ndala kuman ara kumba abe silota ndilan ala na ta ya marfa e bañi ndikay dikanata fir'auna na dafa yako watrukul bahra rahwan yos yimume be kam ala la fakam man sayata nda hada man wala silam kam yos ni silanta do ni borta do da bundala do ko e borta nan jaw jawala do e ka bundala soron fo wonde pura kana do no e ba ngatu yende hada dun nan no man bar ala kay ko babu la wanya isa e fir'auna fa nan ala mole e dun taje ala ko iko baye sayaji wa kay ko watrukul bahra rahwan ala la fakala sembo yinta ga tandi so ni musa na la moluta da ala tendo musa ala tendo ko ala minka ko ada madde mo ay min fota ngabe lo dalilo lel kam ni ala nemo ke nyanda ka ala tendo ala nemo la nemo si dafa bare nemo manyana mo balo firindi la saka ko makana ro kala kana mo balo firindi ke yandani كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى هذا ما دين كي يندا بلوك فرين تمو ما أتي أجا كوني يس أوكي ها أجينا تاني يندا قوات من أبي على دانيلا أبي منو ولا بانكورا أبي دينكرال بيندلا أبي دارا وسيلة على كبر على فتوى كذا أجينا تاني مونجي نسأل الله السلامة والعافية ولا أن خطبة منك is very important مول يمنتا وكوجي موسى عليه السلام على التن وتنين عليه دم ديلا إن يندا منك على التن مول كفوتبول كبانال بتندم كسر لا تكسر النجا إن بندي متها وبلور منك ها نسأل الله السلامة والعافية مبمونة تعالى ونعم وفنقوني أكو كلا نراك سوم كلا أكو يكون قلنا حول ما ياتا موسى لكتنبات الله كان كلا فاديسو نحن معاشر الأنبياء أبناء الله كون فادين للموت إلى دينو البيموتين بري إلى شريعون للفتح الوالي ولا الفتح ولا نأكو إن البيوس أصل من ترى موسى نوما نأكو موسى نوما جبل النكيلا بس الله صلى الجبل النكيلا والملك أفو إيسا نحن يكون النصارى لمن النصارى يبقى النصارى نحن أنصار الله ها نياتا مولى دوم يبتر إيسا كم يبقى بلاد كيلا صلى الله عليه وسلم تنجنا بي كيلا يا صلى الله عليه وسلم أي صحابة يا مرياس كيلا نار كبرية جدا يهود الكاكو أمال لفانية كوكيل ما أنا مسلمون بلا بلا جنة إذا نكلفين ولا مسلمون دول بكي بكا كونتان فنيا جناب دومرو لا مرات ها نابي من مرات كيلا صلى الله عليه وسلم دومرو إياك دي مرة كو شيطانو لك دومرو كامرا شيطانو كفيفيجي إبه من يمين مرة شيطانو لك فم فم مرة أبودا بيم شيطان كوت أكوي جنبا بريندوليا ولا مو تحضر ولا تمدن ولا يندكم سانت سيفلايز منهم سيفلايز نيته مسلمي الله إذا بدنا نكون مسلمي أتانو مانجس سيفلايز تيجي والله إلى دينو بجانكور نيامي إلى سلو لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ إلى سال جهني يكو سامبول يبلوس بيسوسا سنيار نين إيمان سال يوم ده إلى سال ما سها يبلو بيكو نسافنو نفانكو لجرابو نين إما فنجانيو إما تنسو فانكو كيجي nganiyo nyenta yeku kensenkel ita wo be kayan no la nyaade min dem wuro ke dale fete nyon na be fengel ina wol be keno la kirindi nyaade mon civilise le boto ha kafir ya bu noldi innamal mushrikuna najasun najasu la muyti ila mu'taqadu najas ibalaw jaato najas ila fama be najas momin ta fam seniyandi la na ta dajala mudola wali wal mutafiqoti ita ata jota da ke istinja ata akela itan wobe kanya no la nyaade bani misli fanga yaka kila la sallallahu alaihi wasallam khairu sadu yamman kanyul la nyin ke ya kanyul la wal kila la khairoti ikana yaka kafiru la muslimu kila mun qudwati momi jiko sadu ko ni de faade ni alabe bennal arjana bi jeel jahannama bi jeel konti bo bi jeel inyata ke yaka kila la sallallahu alaihi wasallam aka nyemi is very important thing amman ka ngi don ka fodde muslim wala ñu yamba kila ñoy ndol man ka ku farolti happy new year ibalo nda mu resinaka kila sallallahu alaihi wasallam hijra mi hira wala ay min wal hijra jang ako afudo sonno mo hatta sonno mo wol fam ga ñon tuje ini mo ke jam fanyo na sonno mo la karo ya hijra ya kunda do bi yeddi ya mo la karo hijra do bi ya baraja la karo mufaraqa ini man ka ku kilendi ili hijra ke ye fam betu ya duniya to koma ye nyaati alal ala ko faman yakila ko sallallahu alaihi wasallam kana hijratuhu ila Allah wa rasuluhu fa hijratuhu ila Allah wa rasuluhu wa man kana hijratuhu lidunya yusibuha mur'atan yankihuha fa hijratuhu ila ma hajara ilayhi niyaka ala nin kila laka be bol sollaji niyaka duniya laka ma ko esi do sodo jela niyo e ba sollaji walla yaka musolla ko kama isa fuda akaman de la ngadi mo men de innamal amal bi niyyat wa innamal likulli imrin ma nawa nasallallahu salamata wal afiyah very important khutba imam wal kamiyalam ko durus wala atodo aynyam fadan tandije comme kila abu de ki sallallahu alaihi wasallam ani sahaba de wonaki sa ni daran doli ade kamen ko tara bonni fanko ani mon ba fala ko ider ke bada fo 10 days o do e ko mo la sankudo manna muharram kabra la yawm awwal sankudo dun dawol hantu awwal mi ala ngoy ke yakar ngame ka ñu iya ala force de nyim fango sudo ye kala ma kanko kaje ko fango nyimbe dunga fo wonde ha 12 be tambila do ya jako e dunda sankudo ye misil mol kasi fo tende so be tambi kadai ka yebi nan kolon kono ga fa nyoy ko sankudo la jura fo ha sal bol bi fanam bude la to fange karamala ibra sira walla do ko ka mol kara ibe mol kara ndamna kila e sumula ki ita man sun kara ne fo bida la man ja wala man ñom kuma kan kende de bari me bula wala bida sila fango pour poso la man ja li pour ila poso sallallahu alaihi wasallam aka ñemil fo da ñil be mu ada jawol kila nyanda ye yakala sumula nyanda sumula kila man kudo ki jana man kewoti ana ta ñing tilifudol fenge kaata pour nga yahudol wali wayata ne kon donni yahudol ma ñana kala ku kilindi anin nasaha is ala jawol lel muti ala jawol lel muti mol ya ñi ñande ñala ko lan tarda ankal yahuda wala nasara hatta tattabi'a millatahum wallahi inarete action la doto fo ni keta peto keta ñani muslime dimul ali jube muslime dimul lel bañem banko kam al ngam fan jube ngam fan cross ni ñen kebal bota yen jumal lel ñanda ko replace jumal lel ñanda ka ke jaam comme ça ka khutba ka ko se ka ba ka ñam mol ya dimul bula comme ça ka ikata man ye ko ibuka non fo ñen donna wala ñen donna ibuka fa pour que salam ro bulam ha jam banko ibuka mo busa fo jumal ko ko kuluro be busa ron fo muslimi ya ko ka be mo chefar ma ñani fon golle ibela dino doya fo muslimi ya ko kuluro ya lodi li parol lel ka ita mo lodi la silol ita lande patul mumunati ila kolta mumunati thaqafa islamiyya ita muslim wolati dinde mo ya fangi ñañante tarra wala ñama de ki ay ba sambal kafir wala ya aba kulul fa abawahu yuhawwidanihi aw yunsiranihi aw yumayyisanihi ikamu ne ñini jande fo jande be arjana dilel jang wala be arjana dilel nasallallahu salamata wal afiya mo isi sile ala temo wadi mbaali mil bi jande di fen sawde bankolu kan ibota bankolu mil kan wadali ka jawla don ke be ni yasat laje adama dim foro mi alon ka aya kafnu nyum fa de kada mo frodi kila fa sallallahu alaihi wasallam mo fa batiro kan al siyabi al ngam mira wala tinna islamic school nyanda so lay burka ka dadaro ko pour sama al fali so laje a fo jang dollel nyanta ka banko je yelman amman ken ba kala nen kidol nin fon kollel bari na daji ko lembe min tala kilabu sallallahu alaihi wasallam kilabu ka julu joki na kafiro da wani na daji ko do ko dinkiranto ike mu dare ya o man kan yinde ye kanule muslimi atanda ko muslimol man ka tori yesol de mi am ko niye ki jola ke fara muslimi ayo haram yandile pour que mol tarbi ke silandi o man ka dinati tadi o man kan do la dino be mu pislet abe mu pislet salam do nabi ñanta nga ñina tandi muslimul mil bi jam e ba kata kan alhamdulillah bar sa ñi ñante mira dimba ya miliyan ko del bi sa ni sa fo ka ke balu kan bar sa mil bina sa u fonden kel ñanda ke to mili qur'anul tan kan je bitam kudo le bi isulata bul mun kudo le min tambi dañi na sal ala la abe mun do kula kala be ita nga ñanda mun min tambi dañi nako ay na ala la mu da tambe yetar sal ka ko mun fi man dal tambi taw نسأل الله السلامة والعافية. خطبة منك is very important. Nyanda ka nyulu take la moya ka nyilbe nyilde ko durusot. Nyim protest man ke muslimi ama ma ko fenna fa muslimi min tora. Ye muslim mol ke terrorist dibita tra sesoro din kiranto ibe bu mol fetan laje labon ning kafiru ajibe fo bora jam mol bu ke bora ni ko be bora tara jam imam bu jambe ke muslim mot. Ha? لا معبود بحق إلا الله ين كم ما تباك بلنا فنقولون كلا ولا صلى الله عليه وسلم من صحابة لسنة جيل نعمت يندك سوم ودايك كندو منات نه هجرة كي يلا بانكور بلا يلا فمن تجي نافلو تجي إتارا على بين سبحانه وتعالى يلا كلا فنتا يا بين ولا أن على كم ما في آية 100 في سورة توبة على كو السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان قال يجينا فسبحانه وتعالى من كده سابن الله فرولت يسأل الله السلامة والعافية ونيانك اقتداء كلا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقولون وربلاجي يبدأ بالون دي واتا واري سنو رفاجي مولا شولا يبدأ بالون داودا فانك كلم بيجي ومن فنانكم ماري ما يدول بيجي ولين يوم عاشوراء ko da sunu lungal e ko don ne Hussein fa da Karbala al Karbala itol mil fam kada khawana itol le Hussein jamba ya fa ala na te dankato ma kilmulu e ke fambaram hani dingira do ni ma ga bi da do ne sunu dile ko nyim banko kanje ta kire de aninda banko ko tamul kande e fam le ka ko le be ngol farala yero be bonna ko nyamato bare banko do le kata ke do ne sunu di yero abuka tune balo jato ko shaytan mo shayatin al insana sallallahu alaihi wa sallam hidayah e won fana jarabe ta wala nyaa ni wasida wada wala be yero lu jela nari iran banko bi bane banko me libanu ngol sifa do bili alan ko shiyare fen kata ji yero ko faka boy la nyim fan ko mo fay kasira amanda ndo amanke ke fam pengule ka kala mutala bari tafundo la wa aqidakum ma tabakel aka jarawa ya balo be faram faranga baro fen be so wala mo ata aje ko mo na batot e muslimol ta nda wasifa do ka fu ko sanko do mol ka si ngin dinga e ke ngina mo firawna la samala ngina mo kar la samala wala ne ka akul la faniyalo ndani sa de kilom do janin do ya ka ni jam to jam do ya ka jam ko masjid rahma do ya ko umar ila kuma kan da kira kilende e kala faniyala yalo wonto manke to nyaade ha wala fabrique la fabrique shaytan fabrique fanko na fabriquer na sallallahu salamata wal afiya pour ñi kam ka taali ko gos ko bañi ngaaje ko ay nafaso do bakel ning atara milkam kam mabe ngan nafa ay min fa ko mata baka mon ka kam munasabat ha bari sam foke ya ka kila la ngo fekkela sallallahu alaihi wasallam wala mun nabal wo mu bebe
The Sheikh gave a very lengthy advice. I could not write everything. Inshallah, I say only one line was to write. He spoke about the Imam's khutbah. He says it is very important and has a lot of benefits. Speaking about the days we're in, the days of Muharram, these 10 days, and Yawm al-Ashura. He says, before that he spoke about he mentions that these are not the characters of Muslims. What we find today, he said, the Imam, he mentioned in the khutbah, these demonstrations that people they do, like the person who burned the Quran in Sweden, the Muslims went out doing demonstrations. He says this is not the way of Muslims. This is not the character of Muslims. He said the Prophet ﷺ, when the people mocked him and disturbed him and harmed him and discriminated against him and attacked him and did all sorts of violence against him, he said, what did he do? They did not get up to demonstrate, rather they left that place and they made hijrah. He said they left the place and they went to another place to protect themselves from the harm. He says, just like our people today, to gain something of the dunya, they say they are suffering from poverty, they take the back way. They make hijrah to Europe to make money. He says this hijrah is what is even more befitting of the person for his deen, for the person to run away to save his deen. He says the Prophet ﷺ advised us. He says when he went and met the Jews in Medina, they were celebrating the day of Ashura. He says he advised us to fast and he himself fasted. He asked the Jews why were they fasting that day. They told him that this was a day Allah saved the people, the children of Israel and Musa from Fir'aun. He said the Prophet ﷺ told them, then we have more right to this than you. So he fasted and he advised the Sahabas to fast. He says, he taught Musa a lesson there and Allah saved them from Fir'aun. He says when they reached the sea, Allah told him to part the sea by striking his staff. The sea opened. He says, unusually you will see, if you are running away from your enemy, once you run into a safe place, you close the door. He says, but Allah told Musa, do not close it, leave it open. Allah wanted to teach us a lesson here of who has true power and might and who has true control. He says, Allah told him, leave it open. Indeed, they will follow you. And Allah wanted to teach us a lesson there. He said in the ayah, وَاتْرُكُوا الْبَحْرَ رَهْوًا. He says, Allah told him, leave it open. They will follow you. He says, as they followed Musa and Bani Israel into it, Allah made them drown in there to teach them a lesson. He said, what was the character of the Prophet? He says, and these are the characters you must follow. They thanked Allah for the blessing. He said, how did they thank Allah? You will find that he was fasting as the Prophet ﷺ fasted to show us how to thank Allah for this day. He says, the Imam gave a very, very important reminder that we Muslims, we take our characters from these people, the Prophet ﷺ and his Sahabas. We should not look onto other people and do as they do, like this kuffar. When they are angry, they go and demonstrate. He says, rather we take from the character of the Prophets and his companions. He says the Prophet ﷺ, the same thing he did when he found the Jews doing something, he told them what? We have more right to it than you. If it's good character, we have more right to that good character than you. He says, because the Prophet ﷺ said in a different hadith that the Prophets, they are brothers. And they have brothers and they have different sharia. They are like brothers who come from the same father but have different sharia. He says the same way the Prophet ﷺ saw it befitting that he and the Sahabas to fast that day, and they did more fasting during the 10 days to show us to be different from the Jews and the Christians, because these are the enemies of Allah. He says the Christians, as they used to call themselves, the Nasara, the helpers of Allah, he said they are not the true helpers of Allah. If they were the true helpers of Allah, they would have followed the Prophet ﷺ. The same way the Jews, they were not the true followers of Musa, even though they were fasting that time when the Prophet ﷺ met him. They pretended, and they were pretending to be true followers of Musa, but if they were truly true followers of Musa (alayhi salam), they would have followed the Prophet ﷺ. He says, so a Muslim, you do not take your character from these people people of the West, the Christians and the Jews and the others like them. He says, rather, the Muslim, you should be happy and content to take your character from the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. He says, it is sad. Sometimes you find Muslims, they go to the extent they are not fulfilled, they are not happy until they copy these Westerners, until they copy the style of the Western people. To the extent he will do his best to drink with his left hand the same way they drink with their left hand, or eat with his left hand the same way they drink with their left hand. He said, and what a shame this is. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned to us that Shaitan eats with you if you eat with your left hand and drinks with you if you drink with your left hand. He says, and we think, or those people who do it, they think that this is being civilized. Following the Western people, they believe this is being civilized. He says, how can you be civilized when the people you follow, even when they go to the bathroom, they do not clean themselves? How can you be clean if you don't use water to clean yourself? He says, these people, they are not clean. He mentioned that, he says, he said, Allah, he told us that these people, they have filth with them, and they are people who are not clean. And he says, the cleanliness is clear to you. They are physically not clean and spiritually not clean. These are the people whom you try to follow. He says, it's a shame. These people do not clean themselves. They are people whom rather you should not follow, rather you should follow the example of the Prophet ﷺ. He says the Prophet ﷺ taught us how to clean ourselves, and he showed us how to clean ourselves. He says this is the way we should be following, not the way of these people. He says the Prophet ﷺ told us about how to clean ourselves, especially when we use the bathroom and the other ways. He says, so one should make sure he copies his character from the Prophet and his Sahabas. He says during the 10 days, as the Imam mentioned, he says this is really important. And he reminds us to go back to that khutbah of the Imam. He thanks the Imam, he says we should go back to it and make sure we take the lessons from it. He says these days we should do as the Prophet ﷺ said and as he did. Not as some people they do, they will celebrate what they call Talabun, where we come from. He says some people they will wait 10 days after the New Year, the Islamic New Year, because the Islamic New Year just begun. He says some people they will wait 10 days after and then they will start to celebrate. He said, what a strange thing. He says even the kuffar, when the New Year starts, they celebrate the first day. These people they will wait until 10 days after to celebrate. He says it is not even the way to celebrate, but when they even celebrate, they even go astray a different level or a greater level. They will wait until 10 days and then they will celebrate. He says, so the lesson for us here is the Muslim, he should not take his character, he should not copy, he should not model and emulate the disbelievers. Rather, the one he should take from is the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. He goes on to say, he says, and this is our problem. We copy these people, we say, oh, because your child now is in America, they say, oh, an American child. And they copy these people. They leave their kids to do however they like, to talk however they like, to behave however they like. They say, oh, my child is also like these people. He says, no, This is a disgrace. These are the ones who will be the leaders of tomorrow. These are the ones whom after the elders they leave, because we say the elders are safe. He says these are the ones after the elders they leave, they are the ones who are supposed to replace the elders. If you leave them like this, how then will they be correct? How then will they be able to correct the people of tomorrow? He says, so it is evil for the Muslims. He says, and it's really, really important. He says he cannot stress it enough to remind us of the Imam's khutbah, to go back and take the lesson from there, that the Muslim, his actions should not be like these disbelievers, doing demonstrations, doing acts of blowing up buildings, acting like a terrorist. It should be someone when people see, they feel safe and secure, they see peace, they see safety. Not someone whom people, when they see, they are scared, they feel frightened. He said no, rather the person should be as the Prophet ﷺ and his Sahabas were. They should be people whom they set good examples, because if you do not do so, you will be rewarded, rather you will be punished for whoever follows you in that sin. And if you do good, then you'll be followed by those, you'll be rewarded by those who ever follow you after you. He says, so we should not be like those. He says, like those who celebrate during this Yom Ashura, they go and beat themselves in places like Iran and Syria, so-called Muslims. They say, oh, Yom Ashura for us is a sad day. He said, while the Prophet ﷺ said it was a day of happiness to thank Allah, for them they do the opposite. They say it's a sad day, they beat themselves and they cut themselves, they bleed, you will find blood all over them. Some people, they even get intoxicated. He said, because why? They have gone as far astray and have taken something other than what the Prophet ﷺ, he advised and showed us. So he says it is really important that the Muslims, he said he cannot stress it enough and remind us that really, 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 we have to do our best to take our character from the Prophet ﷺ.
شيخ الإسلام قول لا إله نافيا جميع ما يقبل من دون الله. أكون يقول لا إله هذا منك توحيدات يبايروك بدو فهم مميفه فهم فهم كبدو على تنول يا بلا بل إلا الله مثبت العبادة لله وحده نيكو إلا الفعل ومثبت النيرون يبدو ثبت على دماري ميران كمان دنيو سورة بدو كما أنه لا شريك له في ملكه كو على مرارو فنندو أمان دنيو سورة على مرارو نيامي أما مرة روسو على باتو فنانت ولا نيام ولا نافيو ني بايروكي أمانك توحيدوتي ني سبت ندرو دماك أمانك توحيدوتي فويسي فلول الفقنيوم يا لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله يا بايروكي باتو فيوم ميكي ملا باتو من تونيا يا تونيا ما سبت ندرو ولا ألتي سبحانه وتعالى و لا إله إلا الله عائشة فلول تدمين دار شيء لون ناري أفاكم ما يربو كالو فلو ولا العلم ينجد كالو كوبات منسل كيرمي بتونير فارد ما بايرو تواري سبتين دروت علي أتمنى كوك كيدا فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله ألون كو بات منسل كيرمي بتونير فارد ما وينجد يولو أنا رافي سورة زخرف أكو إلا من شهد بالحق وهم يعلمون ako fomin sede atanin to nyara wala la ilaha illallah anda be londe ngala fanan asonno moto nenga ya fo ato sonno moñim fanan ya mu da be to nyara sonno wonin ko kida fa sallallahu alaihi wasallam hadithu mi yaron ko hadith Uthman bin Affan kida ko man mata wa huwa ya'lam annahu la ilaha illallah dakhala aljanna ako momo fada ibe londe nyina ko badu man sar ken mi be to nyara fa ala akoy mari be dunna arjana rawahu muslim فلان جم اليقين ولا يدان كان ياسر كما كان ما دلت عليه ولا لا اله الا الله من تندي مي علان كو ويسي كولتا كم نيكو لا اله يتر دان كان يارن نكو بد من سن كريمي بتو نفا على دم اكنا كسيكوت ولا انكو على تمم على كو انما المؤمنون الذين امنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا على كو دي الايمان يا مولو تو نياما مؤمنتي ولا من الايمان على لا اذا كانت على لا انا ركيلا وكولا إيماننا سيكو سدوت كا سيكا على لا كولا كو تونيا على مكيلين ولا من كيلين أني كا سيكا كيلا لا كولا لا كيلا ريا مويا كا سيكو سدوت كيلا ينفع صلى الله عليه وسلم وفنا مسلم لا في من الحديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه كيلا كو أشهد أن لا قال النبي أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله بأن أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأني رسول الله أكا سيديا كو بدو منزل كمين بتوجه فعل دم أن عندهم على الكلا كلا فهم سيدا أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأني رسول الله kila ko la yalqa biha abdun ako jomota benyo yaro ko la yalqa Allah biha abdun jomota ala benyo yara yin kuma kan ghayru shakin fiha atra man tara sikarin kuma kan ma ka la ilaha illa Allah illa dakhala aljanna fa ma rashid aljanna rawahu muslim wa yaqulu alayhi salatu wasalam man laqaita aw fa abu hurayra kila be sanjam do kono gadi no kono bije sahaba do ni man kila ja kam da ku dole be bal e wulta ka kila ni sallallahu alaihi wasallam abu bakar bolo kono umar bolo kono fu kala tara dinkira na abu hurayra bije ako abu hurayra fendi ni ni momin benda silo kanden min warai hadha alha'it ni fenso ko matan amari seriya ko badu man sakere mi beto nya fo ala damma abe danken yari wala asna bi ana mustayqinan biha qalbahu fabashirhu bil janna ko ya se wonni ko arjana wala nyanda be dunna arjana abu hurayra ta kurka afo barane umar benda umar na ta mun puru nyin kama ko mol kana to ko damma kan ita baro kel ya jel bara abu hurayra jannin saya akabam kabrasa bida saya la anada fa ya fo asilata nyinna ko braka na fa ata be londo ay londo nyimma ba kila ka fo moli sallallahu alaihi wa sallam yimbe sarti sabanyam kono al qabul li madlulati wa muqtadiyat hadhihi al kalima bi qalbihi wa lisanihi wala nyindi yesom la ilaha illa allah ka kuma kan min tandi yeson no motani namut ala ko kadhalika ma arsalna ka bolnya mankiro ka min qablika jannida kila kana fi qaryatin sa'ata wa min nadhirin maslan dirla wala kilariya mum minke maslan di alali an kan kado illa qala mutrafu fo sate la kantiyo ila kandalu safoko inna ndonde wajanna abana ngam famanyul tarala ummatin dino wala kande kolan taraku koto wa inna ala atharihim ndol la alfa folol lo siloji muqtaduna ndol be yakara atol lim fem kan ndol tota akam da bi na mol ko la fo e ka kawnda alfal ko don man ka to nyaata iba don yole konka majlis wal balul alfa folol tala wulolo ko ne selolu te ni la tarbol ka baluni la halalo wal man day man ka fanko de hatta majlis el ka fami jalimun ale jalimul lo min ko ka bitaro la kam mole tilibula ba e ko ka bitaro la kam jubero e ka fa na bana e kamulla na wala nyare ka fa na zalim e ka fa na zalim safar jalim bana zalim ko ka da safar fanko dal kam lor mo to nyendiro ni mu kuma kan jawba ala ko sade mollo kanda mol lidar he andi men daran dol kankar tambe fo kankar mu kila waya to londi men ala londo danda min da a wadam mala futandi anda ala ba konti bola won ay min don dino ta war futandi dal bara ma min don ato futandi no la manka kila ta sallallahu alaihi wasallam amanka ma'sum wat na min ka beti ada ni ala kitabo ni sunno nyon damba ta ala al ain war ras ngoya katal bin yaaje ko dol be dino lo alhamdulillah ta ko la walla nsi duwa e militan mita bare ndol mil be ko man manya na yaka ka wonde boda karle ba ko waso be na fa fen fen al kiyamo do mo dambe wote na fa ila barakendo kila al sallallahu alaihi wasallam man bata bihi bi ana amalu lam yusri bihi bi ana nasabu man bata bi na ila baro itarte to ila nasabote ifen genno no wote tambe no la nyaata wote tar yandi no kala ka bora nyama ni nda to de ka ko ndoliye ngana alfa fulul tara nyene kam andun tan be yakara won ala ko ko denke fi suratu safara ko innahum kanu wa kunyum multatun idha qila lahu li ko la ilaha illa allah ka hubad man take fa ala damma yastakbiruna kayfa wara
the Sheikh, he says that this statement la ilaha illallah, it has two parts. He says when you say la ilaha, you are negating everything that is worship. He says you are refusing and rejecting everything that is worship other than Allah. He says so the person say la ilaha alone is not sufficient. Rather he must complete the statement and say illallah, which he says it means that you specify that worship, no one has the right to it, no one is justified to have it except Allah. He says the same way kama annahu
لا شريك له في ملكه.
No, لا شريك له في ملكه. He says the same way. He says the same way that Allah does not have any companion, any partner in His dominion, in His control and ownership and everything he does. He says the same way Allah does not have any partner in worship. He says, so the person, he must say this statement, he must say it with completion, saying La ilaha, and then negating everything that is worship, and then completing and saying illallah, and saying that worship belongs to none except Allah. He says this statement, the shahada, it has conditions. He says the first one is al-ilm, it is knowledge. He says it is as Allah says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that no one has the right to worship except Allah. He says it is the same as Allah says in another place that a person must know that Allah is the only one who deserves to be worshipped. He said, the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, مَنْ مَاتَ وَهُوَ يَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةَ. Whoever dies and he knows, he says the Prophet ﷺ is saying here the person must have knowledge, al-ilm. He says the person must know that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. He says Muslim narrative. He says so the person cannot just say this statement, but rather he must know it firmly. He says if the person does so, then he actualizes the correct meaning. He says the second condition is al-yaqeen. He says after having the first condition of ilm, the second condition is al-yaqeen, meaning certainty. The person must be completely sure and believe in it without any doubt. He says the person cannot have any doubt of this. The person must be sure that Allah is the only one who deserves to be worshipped. Nothing else deserves to be worshipped except Allah. He says the same way as it came in Surah Al-Hujurat, where Allah, he says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Allah, he says, indeed the believers are those who believe in Allah and His messengers. ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. Then after that, after they believe, they have no doubt. He says this is the way of the Muslims, that you must believe in it firmly and never doubt it, that Allah is the only one who deserves to be worshipped without any partner. He said the same way it came in the hadith of Muslims. He says Abu Hurairah, he mentioned it, that the Prophet ﷺ, he told him while they were sitting that go out behind this building, behind this wall, whoever you meet and he bears witness that Allah is the only one who deserves to be worshipped and I am the messenger of Allah, and he dies with this belief firmly, knowing it firmly without any doubt, he says give him glad tidings that he will enter paradise. He says as Abu Hurairah went out, he was going out to do what the Prophet ﷺ told him. He met Umar ibn Khattab. When Umar ibn Khattab heard from him what he said, he told him go back, because if you tell the people this, they will become lazy and they will depend on this only. He says so Abu Hurairah went back and he went back to the Prophet ﷺ. He says but before he passed away, he made sure he made it known to the people. He said because he feared that Allah might punish him for hiding the knowledge. He says because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that in the hadith. He says so the person must know this and have belief in it with certainty. He says as Allah, he mentioned in a different place that he sent messengers, and whenever he sent messengers, Allah, he says in the ayah that whenever he sent messengers to a group of people, they used to what? The leaders, the elders, the forefront people, they used to deny, and they would say what? We are following our forefathers. He says just like our people, they say today, they will say when you find them doing something wrong, he says like the actions they do, some of which contain shirk, some of which contain bid'ah, they will say, oh, well, this is what we found our forefathers doing. He says they accuse their forefathers of having knowledge they have now that their forefathers did not have. He says because those people, Allah will reward them for whatever good they did. And perhaps you do not know, but Allah may excuse them for their mistakes. But you, the knowledge has come to you, and then you deny and say, oh, we will follow our forefathers. He says this is not befitting. He says this is the excuse that these people they give. They say, oh, when you find them doing wrong, they will tell you, oh, we found our forefathers doing this, so no matter what, we will not change. Allah, the Sheikh, he says this is not permissible.
سأتناني جاء الانقياد لمعانيها ومقتضياتها ولكن يالا كما كان لقطو كمن تنيب لو نوم كابا بار وطعنين كفتندرو دليلنا على ومن أحسن دينا ممن أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن أكم وجمع دينو نيا كتامي مونا يا فانسي ألم كافني ألم أن داتا كماري موحد منك بارو نيا لا ولا توحيد الكيف أنا أرى حديث كده بس لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. أقول كده إنك ينور الإيمان يا موت. fo ala atlabela firin min ala la fi ke bula fenno man de kilani min wala ila kanu fen ila ni dia ko bula fenno man de kilani min ala sallallahu alaihi wasallam wala isbina kalima ni sarti lulu nyaal ikhlasu fil iman biha wala ni dia kal sandiro ke ila liman ya wala ala ko ala lillahi dinul khalis wa dinu kansarum mandra ala le faytan ni kana tara kon mo ndir kana ta wan ka wan kana traje كان دارك إن المنافقين في الدرك الأسفل من النار ولن تجد لهم نصيرا إلا الذين تابوا وأصلحوا واعتصموا بالله وأخلصوا دينهم لله ألا يغلب والعياذ بالله المنافق هو الذي يظهر الإسلام أكال مسلم يالا تندي برالا كونت كافر يالا بيجي أكويت للبتر جهنم ردوم والعياذ بالله أكويت دي مارلاس ألا نعرف فوني مول ملي توبوسي يبلو نفاقو كن يلي كفا يتوبوسي ألما yela baro be tene tawhidul ye wa atasamu billah comme ça ye fantan kan ala la dino muta wa akhlasu dinahu lillah yela dino kan sadi ala damma ikana ka pour moli jara wala moli ma kila ko sallallahu alaihi wasallam as'adu an-nas bi shafa'ati akum mo be kunna di wala kila kan jurola yawmal qiyamah al-kiyamah man qala la ilaha illa allah mu'min ko badu man sala kire mi beto ko ala damma mukhlisan aya kan sadi min qalbihi asunna mo kana nafsihi wala fa ne rawahu al-bukhari وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام فإن الله حرم على النار من قال لا إله إلا الله كلاكو صلى الله عليه وسلم عليه حرام يندم بامل مؤمن لا إله إلا الله بل من سلك من بتونيا فعلى دم يبتغي بذلك وجه الله ألو لا إله إلا الله كما كان على الدنيا دم رجلي متفق عليه ورنجم أسلم في اعتقادها تونيا يا سدو إلى تفندوني دوك لا إله إلا الله كما كان في الباطل كله ميران كاي تونيا كم لا إله إلا الله إلا فايك تونيا فندي يقول نعم كان كأرك ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم سورة العنكبوت فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا ولا يعلمن الكاذبين ألك كتبورو كنيدا كم مول جربينو جنة أتول كنا كيلي دي لمنكو pour ala be londe ñu fala ya'lamanna Allah alladhina sadaqu ala be to ñamulu lonna wala kono wala ya'lamanna al-kadhibina be faniyan dulu lonna wala kono ala ka ko boro ko ñam subhanahu wa ta'ala wa qala alayhi salatu wa salam ما من أحد يشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله صدقا من قلبه إلا حرمه الله على النار متفق عليه كلا صلى الله عليه وسلم مودك من سيدي على بعد ما سكر فعل دم أسيدي على محمد على الجند على كلا لن تونيا كان صندوقكم فعلى سافته حرام يندم باي ولولا جمع المحبة لهذه الكلمة ولا ينجن يوم كانوا لا إله إلا الله أنا من تل أراكم من الناس أبي مولكم من يتخذ من دون الله أندادا ولك على تنولو إك متروك على تنولو لا كل كسينات عليه يحبونهم يقول كان كحب الله كوي على كنيا يمشرك المحبة مول يندي هكذا ده يو جلون كانوا نيامي يعرف أن كانوا نياما يمشرك المحبة وده يندك لا إله إلا الله كما كمان ينتهك كانوا كلا صلى الله عليه وسلم كنت بدا حديث فلو لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به سينجم الكفر بما سوى الله من المعبودات ولا يندي يكافريا يبلم فعلته منه بدو فعل مني على من كل والبراءة من الشرك يبوس فلان كفر وأهل أنا أدون كول أراكم فمن يكفر بالتاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها مؤمن كافريا جلم إلي من يتعالى ليتلي فم متميران كاببان من ميران بعد كله better ya burka fanko yin lawa insha Allah ya insha Allah
now the Sheikh he says the fourth condition is al-qiyam, that a person must completely submit himself firmly with this statement that he says the person must not have any conditions with him or have any things that will make him not completely give himself to it. He says rather the person must truly submit himself without any strings attached. He says in the hadith the Prophet he says no one will be a true believer until he is fully completely satisfied and submit himself to this statement that he mentioned. He says the fifth condition is that the person must do these acts not for people to see him, but rather he must do it for the sake of Allah. He says the Prophet he says in the hadith that he says the Prophet he says in the hadith that whosoever, he says the Prophet he says in the hadith that the people will have their right to my intercession, those whom they say this statement with firm belief without any strings attached, they have no doubt with it. He says in a different hadith the Prophet he says that Allah made haram the hellfire for the one who says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, seeking only Allah's face. Meaning the person didn't do this as a form of showing off, but rather he did it seeking Allah only. He says this leads to the sixth point, which is the person being truthful. He says the person must be truthful with his statement, not saying it with an act of falsehood. He says in the ayah, he says Allah he did that so that he can know those whom they are truthful from those whom are lying, or those whom are doing treachery. They are tricking either the people or trying to trick Allah when they cannot trick. Rather, Allah knows their reality. He says the same thing in the hadith. The Prophet, he says, no one will say this shahada with truthfulness except that the fire will be haram for the person. He says, so the person who says this, he must say it truthfully without seeking anyone's face and must be honest in his statement. He says the seventh condition is the person must love this thing that he's saying, this shahada that he's saying. The person must love its conditions, the acts of worship and everything that surrounds it. The person must love it. He mentioned the ayah, he says, Allah, he says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَندَادًا. Those whom from the people, they take other than Allah, things, people, beings, idols of worship. He says they love it as they love Allah. He says this is the shirk of love. He says the people need to be careful of this. Those idols, those so-called shuyukh that they worship, the extent to which they love them besides Allah, he says this is an act of shirk. It is the shirk of love. He says the eighth condition, the person must free himself from shirk and the people of shirk.
نعم. وتفسيرها الذي يوضحها قوله تفسير من نار من باقين لا ولم وإذ قال إبراهيم أبو كلا فيكم واتنا تنبو من إبراهيم كل أبيه فما وقومه أنا لهم إنني تدي براء تيم ولا مما فهم تعبدون الكلمة ولا يند ولا تنا فلان كفم ولا يمن ين كنولا عندهم أنا دون جوري يمن ين فلان كفم ولا كنولا يمن ين فلان كفم فلان كنولا يرام يمن ين كنولا نيجالم بتداري أنا كده فاهم تقول يا ربي كان إبراهيم جا أتندى فاهم لكم هم بيتولاني إلى أنا رمون مبيانا الكفر من الفتح أقول إلا فدا الذي فطرني ولا مماريو ينتمي أنتدى فإنه سيهدين أقول وبين كان دندلا أقول جعلها إبراهيم نراك كلمة ينكما كمان ينك باقية ولا أن كلمة التوحيد كما كان كلمة أمانك كما كان جمع وكأنا لكلمة بالتنا آيات توفن في أقبها على دمنول كون آيات يكوم ولا توفن كن إبراهيم ولا تجي ولا أن نرى في سورة البقرة جنن أكبر كم سالة دمبا يركون كاتن دكتور لا نيندا تجي هدمما فنن منك لا سافو يعقوب لا دمبا يركون كم كاتن دكو أتتارن كورا إبملا بطلا ياتن دكو بطلوا كلا إماري ولا نين إفاما إبراهيم أن إسماعيل مبورا بطلا بيانكم على كلمة دمبا ولا أن جعلها كلمة باقية كما كان تقولون ولا كلمة التوحيد في أقبه قولوا الفرق بين أنت ولا كلام ولا نكافون أن دينه تني دين نمرد لا إله إلا الله عتودي سن نمول كون كاتن ديته مسلمون من كان يندون لعلهم يرجعون إذا تمنوا ورفيس مولو وكي ياتوا وقوله تعالى أن على لكم كما قل كلا فكو يا أهل الكتاب دون كولو توراة جيتات الملكان يهود ولدان موسى نوم إنا هدنا إليك كلمة يهودون أتنيامي ولا نصارى تعالوا بمعنى هلم وأقبلوا عنا لياتلي إلى كلمة كما كان كلون كم سواء مية كان يروك بيننا نتيما وبينكم أنا تلتين ولم توحيدot نيتاتا the Old Testament ibe min tarraje wala nyinde ko Esai ala kilimba bi hadithul fawlu to ala kilimba e kamin fe la police ngamba be kala angale ka ba fa police be harabol mam tiso adle la dino nyenti ye bule se juso la mal wala ne yahudo no musi jaw bande ala jawolle la muit ya jam ha Paul arabol ka fa ko police na Paul ate koma fanke e christian rata manka atle nyen fanko nyen dundi wala ande christian ko min sonda ko e samu ala la jonda la kila la yoro faale ye faale imaje nyina ala kando ba ala ko South Africa mi alon go se christian alfa la mat ale fentan dala sibo ko mi alan ka la taala aka kumbola dara Allahu akbar ala muslimi ala to nyaaji so do muslim mon do min munuta ko ñinta tan mojje la ka min filindi dum bar ala ya kanda abe kumbola dron ata hijo ya sallallahu salamatu wal afiyah dino min mu dino to nyamare inna dino wala na milka fako dino samawiya purka tubabul mujamala yake min fal mudahana comme kafiru le min ni kila mu sallallahu alaihi wasallam nge mari badu e sankili fana o e fere sim mari badu sankili na ko nya wal yadu billah wal masimu mu bet fani alan purka tubabul ta ke se wondi ka fako hay be mu dina kili de dino samawiya akara nyin dom falintal ha ya falina ale o faye qur'an ko ne bo karanna ha sai bo kenu la kilini nyaadi muslim wol ka nyim foy ka mol ko mandi ka e kam pour da wanyem pour nyen kama ko e nyul be kontan no le ala koy ko e kontan lo na may taala accept la ko na ke da koy ke da nyami yela ko dur faram ye tara wo nyama ye tulolu so ye al halul mum be ke do lo min ye salibal ya ke mulhidoti o ko la sine accept bar madam ila muhammad ya be boli be muhammad dino ni kete accept ne wote fan da hande ni ko ghayrul maghdubi fo yahud wan nasara wa bana al yahud tafsir wala yasamana wala nya ala jusu wala bil wala yahud nasara wala yide fan ko nasara kafir wala muti ala le ko man kan joloti ngane mu jamara mo man kan yinde ko bidaka bom le feten ka fenge bari na qur'anu ala e min fanam ko nyento tala ko fani yande ko yela mande ko keto ko ndani ata keno ala ko kila ikumandi ya fay ko na kuma kanka miye kanya mi ya roti nyamu me bete wala nyinde ko wala mun da alla na'budu illa allah ngala femba do naman kala kila ya mun ala ko laqad ba'athna fi kulli ummatin rasula an ya'budu allah wa yajtanibu at-taghut nyina mun bele message wile message ka min fura dila mo me ka min deliver la mo wala moti kon kana femba do naman kala da mata wala nushrika bihi shay'an in kana ko fenka fama wala yattakhidha ba'duna ba'dan arbaban dole kana dole muta'alat ike muta'alat nyami ko sahabi wa fakila sallallahu alaihi wasallam buke muta'alat buke ba kila akoy ko sallallahu alaihi wasallam fay bukali ya markula ka al ya markula ya ka mimu ala soko da koy hanka aka wal mi no mot ala ko tede ko harin nasirin ko digalo na da tilo man bo nyanda so tela nyanda kelate nan digalo be bulala wala ko e ko karolo na mole karoje be sunna e ko hanin de sirin la digalo man na fa ibe nyim banko fam ga nyamol ka duniya dawra kam da wala ta daye sama duniya ko wala ta daye sama duniya ko ala to nyam man tambi nyanda fulan ka ko nasallallahu salamata wal afiyah min dunillahi ala tanol ako fa in tawalla baniye ko ladi wa tauhido nyine ye ko lay man fa qulu shahadu afa ko al shadiya li anna muslimun kon do lemon mol mi alan kon sonta alam subhanahu wa ta'ala wada ma dorana wala naraka fa inna ad-dina inda allahi al-islam ni be nyin tonya ya fula wala mun tauhid wata misri e kilari ya mun me ben wala na bare kana fa kon kana fa nyile ko nga fa ko kitabu dunke wala kana fa ko kafiro ale fa man suratul bayyinah ka ha lam yakun alladhina kafaru min ahli alkitab wal mushrikeen fa mo kara nasallallahu salamata wal afiyah wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam na femu fa beti ata la ko nda bura ala subhanahu wa ta'ala mimman la ko mun to fa lalti adan sheda ba ala dana yamfol al sahaka do kan do keda do mandi now nasallallahu salamata wal afiyah.
The Sheikh, he says, to clarify the ayah that comes in the Quran where Allah he says to Ibrahim, where Allah says Ibrahim said to his father وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ إِنَّنِي بَرَاءٌ مِّمَّا تَعْبُدُونَ, that me, I am free from you under which you worship. He said Ibrahim alayhi salam to explain the last condition that he said that the Muslim, the person who believes in this statement, the Shahada, the La ilaha illallah, the person must free himself from shirk and the people of shirk. He says Ibrahim alayhi salam, he did that even though he was his father. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he freed himself and he told him, I am free from you and that which you worship. He says the same thing in Surah Al-Baqarah where Yaqub alayhi salam, before he passed away, he called his kids, he told them, what will you worship after me? They said to him, we will worship what our forefathers used to worship. He said, Allah said in the ayah, he made it a statement that will remain. وَجَعَلَهَا كَلِمَةً بَاقِيَةً. He made it a statement that will remain so that the people that will come after him, they will say the same. They will establish it and they will live upon it. He says it is similar to what Paul, the Apostle Paul, the one that the Christians they follow, he said he wasn't a Christian. Rather, he faked his Christianity. He made himself to the people as if he became a Christian so that he could change their religion and mislead them. So this is why Allah, an example in our present day, He guided someone among the Christians, the priest whom we all saw in social media. He became a Muslim and took his entire church to Hajj. He says because Allah He made it clear that the true religion is Al-Islam. So the one who truly follows it, when the truth comes to him, they change. He said not like the Yahud, even though they claim they, as he says, they did not establish the statement. The same way with the Christians, they say that Allah helps them, or rather they are helpers of Allah, they do not establish the statement. So he says the true deen is Al-Islam. So the Muslim must establish this deen, actualize it, and not follow the people of Shirk. Rather, he must free himself from them and make it clear what he is and what they are. Not do what some of the Muslims they do. They try to establish some form of similarity, as they say, Deen Samawiya or the Mudahana that they do. They want to make it look to the non-Muslims, they want to make it look appealing to the non-Muslims. So they do not say, oh, these are kuffar. They say rather they are people of the book. He said Allah is the one who called them like that. If you want to copy them, be like them, cut your pants, drink, fornicate, do all the haram. He says until you do that, then they will be pleased with you. If you don't do that, they will never be pleased with you. So if you want to appeal your religion to them and please them, you will not be able to do so. He says we call them as Allah called them, as He said in Surah Al-Fatiha. Allah, He said, they are the ones who are misguided. Those whom Allah His anger befall them, they are the ones whom Allah is mentioned in the ayah. He says the same thing Allah He said in Surah Al-Bayyin. Allah mentioned them clearly. These are the people who have gone astray. Allah is not pleased with them. He says so we should not try to change their names to appeal them and so that they can be pleased with us on our religion. Rather, we should call them as Allah called them. They are kuffar. We do not say this to attack them, to go and beat them or be violent against them. No. But rather we call them as Allah He called them. They are the disbelievers, so we do not make our religion appeal to anyone. He stops there.